So thanks very much for the introduction. This is proof that we are not dead. I'm here alive and kicking. And thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk about Dart. I've very much been looking forward to this and looking forward to talking about work that we are currently doing and where we currently are with Dart. My name is Anders. I'm the product lead for Dart, and I have been for about 5 years, for about as long as we've had the project. And before talking more about Dart, I wanted to just briefly take you back in time, both to explain a little bit about where I'm coming from, where we're coming from as a team, and also my previous relationships with the wonderful city of St. Petersburg. So going back a little over 9 years when I first joined Google, I was working on what was back then the super secret project of Google building its own browser. It was Chrome, and in particular, the team that I joined here in Aarhus in Denmark has been working on the JavaScript implementation in Chrome called V8. So at the time when we first launched, this was about 8 years back, this was by far the fastest JavaScript implementation. I think it was order of magnitude faster than other browsers at the time. And so this is really, other browsers have caught up. So this has really raised the bar for what you can actually do on the web, the kind of web apps that you can build. Rike is a very good example of that. But actually, after a couple of years, what also happened was that on the Chrome team, we wanted to give developers better tools when they were writing web apps and debugging web apps. And that's when we started the initiative around the Chrome developer tools. And back at the time, we actually had the team sitting in St. Petersburg. So I had the pleasure of visiting St. Petersburg. I was the product manager for Chrome DevTools. Visiting St. Petersburg quite a few times and very much enjoyed it. So I'm very happy to be back, so to speak, while not physically in person, at least virtually. But let's go back to the topic of today. I think you already heard a little bit about Dart, what it is. The best source for more information about that is dartlang.org. That is our home on the web. That's where you get more information. But essentially, the way I think about it is it's at the very core of it, it's a language for writing apps. It's object-oriented. It's easy to learn. The syntax is familiar. It has familiar concepts of classes and objects, etc. What we've also strived or tried hard to do is build it in a way that it scales well. By now, we have some very large teams using Dart. And as I think was also mentioned in the introduction, we also want you to be able to run Dart in a lot of different places on several platforms. So you can run it on the server. Most of the Dart code today is used for running web apps. And increasingly, we're hoping to see Dart being used also for writing mobile apps across iOS and Android. But we'll be talking a little bit more about this in the coming minutes. So with this, I also wanted to not just talk a bit about what Dart is, but give you a little bit of an idea about at least how we've seen this evolve inside Google. So from just starting this as a language project, as a way to improve how you can write web apps, we are now at a point where this, at least for Google, this is very serious business. So I was repeating a few of the numbers from the keynote in the Dart Summit that we gave a few weeks back in Munich. If you look at it, just Google Ads alone has more than $70 billion running through software written in Dart every year. So the company heavily depends on this, and it's very stable. Essentially, Dart is the tech stack of choice for Google's ads business. So we're not just seeing Dart being used in a very serious way, we are also seeing a tremendous amount of momentum. These are not simple apps. We're talking millions of lines of code. And just in the past year, what we have seen internally at Google is the amount of Dart code being used more than triple. This actually means that we're very excited about this. This actually means that Dart is the fastest growing language inside of Google. Admittedly, we are growing from a smaller base than, say, Java or C++, but still, I think this is a very impressive amount of momentum that we are seeing at this point. And if you talk to some of the teams internally that are using Dart, why they're using Dart, what keeps coming up is increased productivity. So the ability to do more in a shorter amount of time. In fact, when we have teams talk about how they use Dart and comparing this with the previous web stack they were using, we are seeing some teams reporting almost twice the productivity of what they were seeing before. So while we're very happy about this, we're not done yet. We want to keep improving this and make Dart useful. We want to make sure that it remains the most productive web stack for our users, both internally and externally. So these are a few examples of some of the larger teams that are using Dart internally. If you look at the logos, they're not self-explanatory, but in the upper left corner, it's AdWords. So this is whenever you do a search on Google, the ads that are being shown there, that's all being administered by AdWords. And similar on the right-hand side, in the top right corner is AdSense. This is whenever you're on a web page that shows Google Ads. AdSense is the tool that services these ads. And finally, Green Tea is the internal sales tool that's being used by thousands of salespeople inside of Google. And these are all teams that have deployed and are apps using Dart, using this in production, and have teams working on complex large apps. What I wanted to give you a little bit of an impression of, what are the elements of this web stack, and what are we currently doing based on feedback that we have gotten. What are we currently doing to try to further improve the usage here? So I'm going to talk about the elements in turn one by one. Obviously, at the very bottom, you have the essence of Dart, which is the language itself. Early on, we've also wanted to make sure that it comes with a set of core libraries. So rather than having to start from scratch or having to choose from a very broad set of perhaps incompatible libraries to get even simple data structures going, which is often the case if you start out in the JavaScript world. Dart comes with at least a set of core libraries that are built for Dart. On top of this, there's the application framework, which is Angular Dart. And along with that, recently we have also introduced the components, the Angular Dart components, which gives you the ability to use material design components in a web app fairly easily. At last, but definitely not least, there's the Dart ecosystem, which is all of you guys providing wonderful libraries and packages on POP. This is what also in many cases allows developers. I just talked to one of the other guys attending the Dart Summit, giving a presentation there. He said one of the things that he really enjoyed about writing things in Dart, that you could just go to POP and there might be a solution already there supplied by someone else who built the particular library you're looking for. There's still more work to be done, but we very much appreciate all the contributions, and especially with the recent launches of components, etc. We're also doing everything we can to have our own internal teams provide what they are writing back to the ecosystem. Let me talk briefly about these in turn, starting with the language itself. Kind of at a high level, we tried to design Dart in a way that should be a sweet language to use, in the sense that it should be familiar. You've seen a bit of the syntax already. It's close to existing object-oriented languages. It should have a modern feel to it. we want it to be terse, so it should not be like you feel like you have to overdo it in terms of over specifying things. It should be, fairly compact or shorthand in terms of notation. An important part of this is that we want it to be scalable. We want this to be used not just for someone doing a quick prototype, but actually as you see your team grow in size, as you see your app grow in complexity, we want Dart, and in particular the tools around Dart, to be able to support this very well. We also want it to be flexible and I think also in some ways fun. At least that's some of the feedback we've gotten also from people internally who have, in particular, people who've used Dart for a while and then gone back to using, let's say, a more classical language, and they actually felt like it was really fun to write code in Dart. That's always better. That makes you obviously more productive in your work. As I said, scalability is an important part of this, and actually, when we've talked to our teams internally, part of the feedback that we've been getting is, I need better tooling to be able to scale better, in particular for some of these large apps. And in particular for this, the ability to have sound type system, the ability to do error reporting early on, have tool support when you want to refactor your code. These kind of things are important. And so that's what got us started looking at strong mode for Dart. Leaf gave a presentation about this, so if you're interested in learning more about this in detail, I would encourage you to watch this. This is available online. I think the slides will be available also afterwards, so you'll have all the links, etc. If you want to have a closer look at this. So this is where we're iterating to try and do an even better job of allowing you to scale your web app. Moving on to libraries, as I said, Dart comes with a set of core libraries. We've taken quite a bit of time to try and design it in a way that it's both comprehensive, tight, but also coherent across the board and has efficient implementations. That said, that's also feedback that we've gotten. Sometimes, you're in a situation where there's a particular JavaScript library that either you have to use or that you want to use. And while that has been possible, it's not been the easiest thing in the world. And we've recently improved that quite a bit. So you can have a nice interop with existing JavaScript libraries. This is something that Jacob talked about at the Dart Summit recently. So there's also a presentation you can go have a look at, and also more documentation online. You can actually use types or the interface from the JavaScript library when that's available to the full benefit, in the sense that there's also support for completion, etc., inside IntelliJ when you're writing your Dart code, even when doing interop with JavaScript. So moving up one layer, while we do have companies that have either been impatient or so excited about Dart that they wanted to go ahead and build web apps right away, they have built their own framework and components on top of sort of the bare metal of Dart HTML. But what we often see is that as a developer, to be productive, you also want an application framework. You want to be able to build UIs fast and easy. And admittedly, along the way, we've had some iterations, both with Polymer and Angular Dart or Angular 1. And eventually what we have arrived at, and what our teams internally have been using in production since very early this year, has been Angular Dart 2. This was just launched a few weeks back at the Dart Summit. What happened earlier this summer was that we had a dedicated team for developing Angular Dart, making sure that the Dart version of Angular really works well with and is well suited for Dart. So we saw, just from doing this, we saw some pretty dramatic improvements, and this is the experience that our teams using this in production also had. As one example, we saw 40% reduction in the JavaScript output from Angular Dart just over the past few months, a 10 to 15% improvement in performance. So really, a lot of good work by Fahad and Matan. They talked about this at the summit, so there's also a video you can watch about this. And in fact, Angular Dart 2.1 just launched earlier this week, this Monday. There are further improvements in there, along with actually a bit of cleaning up in the sense that some of the Angular aspects that are already natively available in Dart are now removed, and you can use the Dart aspects directly instead. The framework in and of itself is not enough, and our teams internally also were very well aware of this. So they actually developed a large number of material design components on top of Angular Dart. These were just launched recently externally as well. Core set of components called Angular Dart components. Again, the initial launch was a few weeks back at the summit, but just this Monday when Angular Dart 2.1 launched, we also had the material dialog added. So here's really a set of components that you can take and use. We have thousands of tests running on these all the time. We have the large applications that I mentioned before are all using these for their apps. So this is well-tested components that you can take and use. If you want to know more about how these are being used internally, Ted gave a presentation about this, and in particular how AdWords has been using this. So with that kind of that explains the key elements in the stack and some of the work that we have been doing or are still in the process of doing to further improve the experience for you guys, hopefully. Another important aspect of this, though, is that when you do the development, you want to have a fast development cycle. You want to have good developer tools. And you also want to be able to deploy across the web. And so one question that we've also been getting is both in terms of scalability, but in particular in terms of different browsers. What you do right now is you use Dartium for development. This is a specific version of Chromium that has a Dart implementation built in. But really, we want to make it possible for you to do development and testing and so on across all modern browsers. And for this, we started the Dart development compiler project a while back. Vijay gave an update on this at the summit. This is not launched yet, but we do have teams internally that are using this already on a daily basis, and we are starting to move more teams over to this. It has, in addition to the advantage of being available across browsers, it also has the advantage of being able to scale well, in the sense that you can do modular compilation rather than have to do a full compilation of your Dart project every time you make changes. And with that, it still provides a fast edit refresh, as you know and love from doing web development in general. So with this, in some ways, taking a step back, if you look at the web stack, in many ways, this is now ready in the sense that it's easier to use existing JavaScript libraries if you need to do that. We have super fast developer cycles when writing Dart code, even very large apps. We have internal teams experiencing very good scalability with this. And with Angular Dart and the components on top, we think there's a very solid proposal for doing easy high performance UIs when building web apps. But this is not all. Now I'll get to the even more exciting part. But unfortunately, this is a part that's not ready yet. But if we look into the future, we also want to make sure that there's a nice way of building apps for mobile. And this is exactly the mission of the Flutter team. So what Flutter allows you to do is really is to build high-performance mobile apps that you can run on both Android and iOS, but from a single code base, essentially. So allowing you to write this in Dart and deploy across the two platforms. Also, anyone who's tried developing for mobile knows that it can sometimes be rough. So really, in this design, we've try to see if there's some way we can provide a fundamentally more approachable and pleasant way of building for mobile. And Flutter is our attempt at this. And in some ways you can already, at least if you look at the preview that is available, you can build very nice looking apps with material design, including sort of a native feel for iOS and Android. So while this is not launched yet, we do have teams internally that are using Flutter, and we're working with them to improve Flutter and hopefully make it available in the not too far distance. If you are as excited as I am about Flutter, or you want to learn more about this, Eric gave a very good talk about this. He had the keynote on day 2 of the summit. Eric Sadell is the lead for the Flutter team. And he showed a number of things, including how you could do what we call hot reloading. So essentially showing in the simulator your app running, changing the code, and immediately seeing the change in the app with the existing state. So we're really trying to, again, here raise the bar for what you can do, the kind of experience you can get as a developer. All right, so this is more or less what I had just in summary. Again, I'm a little bit biased on this, of course, but I think we're at a point where Dart is very productive. And if you look at our stats internally growing really, really fast, we hope to be able to replicate this with the help of people like yourself in the broader community as well. It does power some of Google's most critical apps at this point. And especially with the launch of Angular Dart 2 and the components, it's really ready for you to use. Thanks for the attention. This was my part. I'm happy to try and answer questions if you have any.
Thank you, Anders. Вопросы можно по-русски, тут есть кому перевести. Кстати, у нас есть футболки за самое активное участие в дискуссиях от Google Developer Community в питерском. Так что Дима по-английски, наверное, скажет, да?
Dmitry, working in RIKE. Do Google have any plans or strategy to use Dart on server side? Thank you.
So it's hard for me to predict what Google's plans are, in the sense that Google is a large company and we have teams deciding on our own. What I can say safely is that we're using Dart on the server side on the Dart team for our own purposes. So we have things like pub running on Dart. Obviously, all of the tooling is also running from the command line in the server side setting. But other than that, I don't have anything to announce. The focus over the past few years for us has really been on the client side and making sure that these teams are as productive as possible. But you're right. You can run Dart natively from the command line using the VM, and a lot of teams also externally are using this for server-side deployment. Yeah, and the Google Fiber team is Slava is here. He's giving a presentation after me. He's talking into my ear. So like the Google Fiber team is another example of a team using Dart from the command line.
Hello, is there any plans for the Dart 2.0?
Oh, there are lots and lots of plans. The question is how fixed are they, right? So we are experimenting with evolving the language based on the kind of feedback that I talked about before from our teams internally, also from the broader Dart community. So we're experimenting with a couple of features that we think are likely to enter the language, but nothing firm to announce yet. Slava will be giving a brief update on some of the language features that we're looking at potentially adding or adjusting the language. It's important to say that, we want, needless to say, with the kind of teams that we have internally using Dart in production, we want to make sure that whatever evolvements we make of the language, that they're if we make changes, that they are very easy to. That it's very easy for teams to migrate from one version to another. But obviously, one of the things that we're focusing a lot on is strong mode, as you've seen. So for some of the tools, for DDC, for instance, you need to work within the constraints of strong mode to get the full benefits there. There are a couple of other things that we are looking at. I think you're going to talk a little bit about non-nullability later on, which was also one of the early requests we got, which can be helpful, I think, in some cases. So that was a long answer to say, briefly that we don't have Dart 2.0 plans that we can announce. On the other hand, there are things that we are working on, and we're happy to talk about those, but nothing has been decided in that regard as a final decision.
Another question.
My name is Alexander Gorsky. I'm working at the Novell company. I'd like to ask you about, you told us that performance is one of the goals of Dart, that it's much better than, as I understood, JavaScript implementation of the interfaces, but you didn't show us any graphs comparing these two technologies.
Yeah. We want Dart to be fast. The way you deploy Dart code on the web is that you compile Dart to JavaScript. Dart has a more evolved type system, so it's stricter in some ways than JavaScript. So there's some analysis we can do when we compile to JavaScript to, in some cases, improve the performance of the generated code. But by nature, since we're compiling to JavaScript, it's very hard to be faster than JavaScript. So what we want to do is we want to provide a language that allows you to be productive and to scale your team without having a cost in terms of performance of your deployed application. So we want to be as fast as JavaScript or within a few percentages of that. Where Dart is faster, I think if you look at some of the server frameworks and the testing that's going on there, if you actually run the Dart VM, I think the performance numbers are looking pretty good. At least the few independent benchmarks that I've seen run server frameworks. There it's a little bit of a different game, right? Because that's where you run the native Dart implementation.
Okay, I have two more questions. One is how Dart is compared to JavaScript plus Facebook's Flow. And I heard that Flutter was used to create mobile apps. So I want to know, do you use UI WebView on the iOS as backend like Ionic? Or you use some native infrastructure as React Native?
Right. So two questions. I think the first one was, how does Dart compare to Flow from Facebook? I don't think I have a good answer other than that is definitely another way of approaching how you can write web apps and have more support. But I think Slava wants to answer. On the other, maybe before that, I will just briefly touch on the Flutter question. So for iOS, what we do, in fact, both for Android and for iOS, is that we compile to native code and use that to run the UI. So the answer is the latter suggestion that you made, not web UI. So
yeah, I can answer it in both English and Russian. You choose. Would you prefer Russian answer or the English answer?
Russian. Russian is
Okay.
preferable.
Если сравнивать, надо переключиться на русский. Если сравнивать с Flow и Dart, то Flow это что такое? Это взять сверху на кусок хлеба прилепить колбасу. То есть это система типов поверх JavaScript. Dart совершенно независимый язык программирования со своей системой типов, со своим всем. Соответственно, если у вас есть какая-нибудь JavaScript-овая кодобаза, и вы хотите просто не прилепить сверху систему типов, то это Flow вы выбираете. А если вы хотите начать писать на чем-то вменяемом, то это Dart. Ну и, конечно, у Flow там свои заморочки, то есть там, допустим, union-типы есть, у нас нет union-типов, ну, всякое такое. Хотя union-типы обсуждаются. То есть можно с чисто теоретической точки зрения посмотреть, как система типов работает в Dart и как она работает во Flow, и сравнить их. Но это сам по себе доклад на час, наверное, будет. А на второй вопрос вам Андрес уже ответил, что Flutter, на самом деле, он сделан теми же самыми людьми, которые когда-то работали над рендерингом в Chrome, и они решили, что они хотят все рендерить руками. То есть там все рендерится, по сути дела, на канвасе. Ну, не на канвасе, то есть просто все рендерится руками. То есть, допустим, нативные элементы UI не используются, и WebView тоже не используется. Написан рендерер. Большей частью на Dart написан. Если вы посмотрите доклад с Dart-сами, то там есть такая прикольная демка, когда на Android исполняется приложение, и человек идет в меню и переключает look and feel с Android на iOS. И у вас на Android приложение начинает себя вести и выглядеть, как будто оно на iOS исполняется. Меняется физика скроллинга, меняется представление элементов UI и так далее. То есть вот такой ответ. Все очень круто. Вы такого никогда раньше не видели.
Ну, видимо, на русском тогда задам. Получается, и на Apple Watch вы тоже можете развернуть и Dart, и как бы... Ну,
в смысле? С Apple Watch, про Apple Watch был вопрос? iWatch?
Да.
Правильно, да. Там своя есть проблема, поскольку мы никогда не пробовали. То есть там есть проблема с тем, что на Apple Watch надо деплоить приложение в биткоде. И мы в биткоде пока не совсем умеем это делать. То есть никогда не пробовали. И, возможно, будут проблемы. То есть я не думаю, что Flutter заведется на iWatch.
Со Swift была такая история, что когда он только появился, сама библиотека рантайма подключалась и комплектовалась каждая программа этой библиотекой рантайма, и это было очень много мегабайт в комплекте с каждой программой. Соответственно, если вы используете собственный рендерер, то ну, получается, у вас та же самая проблема, и у вас нет никаких шансов ее решить, потому что Apple, как часть системы, эту библиотеку никогда не встроит.
Ну да, то есть это совершенно... То есть если вам нужно выжать последний байт, то да, есть проблема. А если вам хочется силами 3 человек сделать приложение, которое работает одновременно на iPhone и на Android за $10, то никакой Apple тут, конечно, не конкурент, потому что надо нанимать 500 человек с зарплатами больше, чем у это... Не знаю. Ну, в общем, сложно. То есть надо сравнивать апельсины с апельсинами, яблоки с яблоками. Есть преимущества, есть недостатки. Я не говорю, что все... То есть я сказал только, что все замечательно, вы тут скажете, что не все замечательно. Ну, есть проблемы, но надо сравнивать и выбирать.
Есть еще вопросы? Тут у нас we have one question in our broadcasting. What is DDC? Is it a replacement for Dartium or Dart2JS?
So
Several words about DDC.
yeah, so in terms of DDC, this is really a tool for developing Dart and allowing you to have fast development cycles. Dart2JS is still the primary way to do deployment. So when you want efficient JavaScript, you can allow yourself to do more work in terms of whole program analysis and other things that will allow you to generate better code, to remove dead code, etc. DDC is not taking all of those into account. But ideally, with DDC, it is not launched yet, but when it is ready for prime time, ideally you would be able to develop Dart code and not having to rely on Dartium. Dart2JS is still very much needed for production code. Depending on the setup, you can think about different ways of evolving the setup. Whether DDC starts generating better code for production, whether you merge Dart2JS and DDC, but I think those are technical considerations in terms of how you structure the tool. The essence is that you need a way to generate production code for deployment, and you need a way to quickly do dev cycles, and DDC is built for that. I'm still wondering whether your answer on flow involved pics or lipstick or any of that.
Yeah, it's kind of involved.
Okay.
Thank you. Еще есть? Ага. Русский, английский? Конечно.
Could you please give us a bit more insight on how much effort does it usually take to build a cross-platform mobile application?
Could you repeat the question? Could I give some insights on how much effort it takes?
On how much effort does it usually take to build a cross-platform mobile application?
Right. How much effort does it take to build a mobile application? The root answer is that depends very much on the complexity of your app. But I think what is fair to say is that with the existing setup that Flutter has in terms of the widgets and the overall framework, the amount of work that you need to do to develop a cross-platform mobile app is very comparable to what the amount of time that you need to build a non-cross-platform mobile app. In fact, what we've seen from some of the teams that have been experimenting with it, the initial attempt was to just say, we have a well-functioning Android app. Let's try and see if this is actually any good. So instead of doing an iOS app, let's try and build the iOS version using Flutter. And the team was so thrilled with. So after having done the work, they were so thrilled with how fast they could build the app in Flutter that they decided to actually use it for both platforms. So I think even in that setup, when you end up choosing Flutter for both platforms, it's a sign that at least for this team and for their setup, this seemed like a fairly efficient way of approaching it. But still, it's early days. Flutter is not done yet, but it's available and ready to kind of experiment with. The feedback that we've gotten so far from teams internally has been very good in terms of amount of effort needed.
Давайте последний. Хочешь? Нет?
My question will be about Dart syntax. Have you got any plans to add support of interfaces in Dart language?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Have you got any plans to add
interfaces?
support of interfaces, pure interfaces in Dart?
Not that I'm aware of, but I'm happy to ask the language team if they are working on this.
That's all, Anders. Thank you so much for the talk.
Yeah, thank you very much.